Good morning. Hey guys, what's up? Good to see you all in here this morning. Happy Friday. Theodore, Seth, Caitlin, Nandini, hello. Rhea, good morning to you. So happy you could join me on this Friday. Joseph, welcome. All right, what time we start on Friday? 9:16, 9:10 right now. We'll give like maybe a little bit more time. I started the Zoom, or the YouTube a little bit early, so we'll give a little bit of time before we get started talking about things here. There's really not much to talk about today. In fact, I'm going to give you most of the class to work on some stuff. You guys are so funny. Always so proper with one another. How was your day, Theodore Young? Good morning, Nicole. You guys are hilarious. I found this meme yesterday that I thought was really funny. If anyone knows the movie, the original Karate Kid, the original one from back in the 80s when I was a kid, and I found this meme that's like, I just want somebody to sweep me off my feet, and then it's the guy that sweeps the leg in Karate Kid. I don't know why, but that just cracked me up yesterday. Hello, good morning, Nihal. Good morning. It is 9:13 right now, so I guess I'll wait another 3 more minutes for folks to join up. Basically for today, we got about 13 people in here. So for today, just a couple of things that I want to mention to you. We are pretty much at the end of the unit here, right? We're going to be coming back. The first test, as promised from the very start of the school year, was going to be on August 31st, which is on Monday. So our first test is on Monday. We are pretty much done with all of the lecturing side of things. There may have been a few slides that I didn't specifically talk about at the end of the PowerPoint, but between the reading, the Hippo assignments that we've done a lot of due diligence to cover the Renaissance. There is one, though, area that I have not talked much about, and that is the establishment of these new monarchies. So this morning, before I turn you loose on basically what will be the last 2 assignments of this unit, which will be these 2 online quizzes, which are review quizzes from chapter 11 and 12. And the thing about those review quizzes, by the way, is that, now they're working. They weren't working this morning, but I fixed them now and they're working now. The thing about those quizzes, you have 3 tries on them. Okay, you have 3 tries, and whatever your highest score is on any of those 3 tries will be the one that goes into the gradebook. It'll save only the highest score that you get. Now, do you have to take it 3 times? No, but if you get a bad score the first time, or you want to try and get perfect or whatever, you have up to 3 opportunities to do it. And they're just multiple choice questions, kind of, like it's very straightforward. It's nothing like flashy or anything like that. The test questions are multiple choice, but they're stimulus-based multiple choice. These are just kind of like checking for understanding multiple choice. I was going to mention something else too. What was I going to mention? I completely just blanked on what I was just going to ask you guys, but or mention to you guys rather. I know what I was going to say about how to study for the test. Okay, so how to study for the test. Go over your reading guides. My suggestion is always to look at the syllabus every chapter or every unit, and look at the major topics covered in each unit, and just read through the list for unit 1 and ask yourself, like, hey, does this sound familiar to me? Do I understand it? There was one thing that we didn't get to, which was Burke and Burkhart, which are these 2 historians with opposing views on the Renaissance. I talked about, though, when we first started talking about the Renaissance, how some historians felt like, some historians think that other historians have overemphasized the Renaissance as being this cultural rebirth, and have suggested that there wasn't as much change in the Renaissance as some have believed for a long time. And then other historians argue the more traditional argument, which is that the Renaissance brought about a huge, cultural change in Europe. And I tend to kind of side a little bit more with the traditional one. But to put that out there, Burke and Burkhart are 2 historians who went back and forth on the issue. They lived at different times. Burkhart was already dead by the time that Jacob Burke, started making his arguments. But the point being, though, that historians sometimes have different perspectives on things and use different evidence to support their arguments. So the last thing that we have to talk about in this unit is kind of the centralization of these state apparatuses that start to develop in the 1500s, basically, a little bit before that, 1500s, right around the same time as the Renaissance. And in the book, they call these the new monarchies. The idea being that, for example, in Spain, you had King Ferdinand of Aragon and Queen Isabella of Castile. They got married and they unified their kingdoms, which had previously been kind of fragmented. They unified their kingdoms into the Kingdom of Spain. In England, you had the 100 Years' War, which eventually turns into a loss for England. They were very close to the verge of victory, but it turns into a loss thanks to the really terrible leadership of that king we talked about, Edward VI. And then during Edward VI's reign, there ends up being this huge dynastical dispute between the two major families of the Plantagenet dynasty, the Yorks and the Lancasters. And so the Yorkish and the Lancastrian families go to war, and this becomes known as the War of the Roses. The War of the Roses goes on for a while. There's a number of different kind of leadership changes in England throughout this conflict. And the War of the Roses ultimately comes to an end after the victory over the king, Richard III. And so just to give you a little bit of a summary here. So there once upon a time used to be a king named Edward IV of England. Edward IV had two sons. He was a pretty good ruler. He was a Yorkist ruler. And Edward IV died. Edward IV died kind of before his time. He died somewhat unexpected, and he left behind two boys who were like just, early adolescents, like 11 and 13 years old. So there was a legitimate heir to the throne after Edward IV died. Okay, Edward IV, though, aside from having two kids, which the title of king would, of course, pass down to his eldest son upon his death, he also, Edward IV, had a younger brother. And the younger brother was an adult, and his name was Richard. And what ends up happening is that the two boys that are like 10 and 13 years old, they just kind of go missing one day, and no one knows where they went. And of course, if you put two and two together, probably you're already thinking to yourself, what did Richard do? And of course, there's no historical way these days to prove that Richard the Third killed his nephews, but he probably did, because they ultimately found two small bodies or skeletons of remains of what appear to be about a 10 and 13-year-old boy underneath a staircase in the Tower of London, I don't know, not that long ago, within the last century or so. And so that's presumably these two boys, they went missing and were probably killed. And as such, then the title of king would go to Richard, who became king. Richard III became king, most likely after having his nephews assassinated, and then was king for a few years. He's not king for very long, because Richard III, despite being obviously that's pretty cold-blooded to kill your own brother's kids so that you can become king. But Richard III knew that there would have been legitimacy problems with having two boys running the throne, or a boy running the throne, when you're in the middle of this dynastical conflict of the War of the Roses that's going on. People would have challenged the rule of these boys, and it could have created political chaos. And so he ended up, and it obviously would have prevented him from being king as well. So he decides to kill his nephews, become king, or have someone kill his nephews. He becomes king, Richard III, and he is the last English king of the Plantagenet dynasty, and he is also the last English king to be killed in battle. And so there's this battle called the Battle of Bosworth Field. It happens in 1485. And in this battle, Richard III is riding on horseback. And the story goes that he had hired kind of this kind of mercenary guy, and this mercenary guy ends up switching sides midway through the battle and joins the side of the other faction that's challenging Richard III's side of the family. And this other faction was led by this guy named Henry Tudor. And Henry Tudor somehow convinces this mercenary guy to switch sides halfway through the battle. So this mercenary guy goes riding back to Richard III, who thinks that he's still on his side, and ends up charging him. And Richard III is knocked off of his horse. And if you've ever been thrown off a horse before, it's actually extraordinarily dangerous. It could kill you. But it doesn't kill him right away. But what then does kill him is this guy's halberd sinking directly into the back of his head. And so a halberd is like a giant, pole axe, basically. And so Richard III gets knocked off. Now, Richard III is demonized by the Tudor dynasty. So that battle, Richard III is killed in the Battle of Bosworth Field. After that, there needs to be a new king. Because Henry Tudor emerged victorious, there is now a new dynasty called the Tudor Dynasty that's going to take effect in England. And this is the beginning of what we would call the new monarchy of England, because Henry Tudor does a number of things to consolidate his rule. He is preeminently interested in securing his legitimacy. So the first thing that he does, actually, when he becomes king, is that he marries. You remember those two boys that I told you that were killed? They had an older sister, okay, who was like several years older than them. And then a few years had passed anyway. So it's not that she was a kid anymore. She was of like marriable age and stuff like that. Her name was Elizabeth of York. And Henry Tudor ends up marrying Elizabeth of York because she has royal blood from the Yorkist dynasty. And now any children that they have with one another will be viewed as legitimate heirs to the throne because of their background, their pedigree, okay? And so what ends up happening is that he marries her. They have two sons. He does a lot of things. He establishes this thing called Court of Star Chamber, I think is what it's called. And this Court of Star Chamber was like an inner circle of the king, and he starts centralizing English government. There were a number of other things that the English have that kind of sets them apart from other places in Europe at this time. So in England, the nobility of England is a relatively select group of people, and these nobles are oftentimes members of Parliament. Okay, and the members of Parliament, the highest ranking nobles in England, in 1215, so this was several hundred years before the story that I just told you, but in 1215, there was a king of England called King John, and he attempted to raise the taxes on the nobility arbitrarily without their permission. And that does not go over well. And the parliamentarians basically freak out, and the highest nobles are like, that's not going to happen. And so we're not going to give you money, number one. And number two, we're going to force you to sign this document that says that you can't just raise taxes arbitrarily on nobility without our consent. And so King John obviously doesn't want to sign that, but it's either his signature or his brains that are going to end up on the contract. And so he signs it, and they end up limiting the power of the king quite early on in England, which is unique because what ends up being the case over time is that Parliament continuously challenges the king's authority and ends up by the 1600s actually subduing the king's authority to parliamentarian authority. So actually Parliament, even in modern times, is much more powerful than the actual king. And that's been the case for several hundred years now. Parliament basically demonstrated after the English Civil War that it can just take the king out of power and replace them. They behead a king, actually, in the English Civil War, Charles I. We're not there yet, but we'll learn about that story another day. So England is unique because in their centralization process, as they're centralizing the state, you still retain a relatively quite powerful noble class that is a part of that centralization of state. In many cases across Europe, as we see France and Spain and various other locations begin to start to centralize, the nobles are usually against that because what it results in is the absolute authority of the monarch. Whereas in England, the nobles actually kind of go along with the centralization of state because they play a major part in the centralization of the state. So that's the main thing that you need to understand about the difference between England and perhaps some of these other places as we move forward is they're all centralizing, but the product of that is going to be slightly different in terms of the role of the nobility. In France, by contrast, for example, as the French state starts to centralize and we start to see more uniformity about how laws are administered in distant reaches of the realm, ultimately what this does is it subdues the high nobles that lived in different regions who in a previous era, in the late Middle Ages, would have had a whole lot of freedom, autonomy to do things however they want. But as the French state starts to centralize, the king starts to subdue nobles' ability to do whatever they want, and they have to follow according to the rules laid out by the king and the various bureaucratic elements that start to be established to make sure that the king's orders are being followed. All right, so that's going to be one of the major differences of centralization. But there are notably two different places in Europe that do not centralize during this time. First of all, Italy. Italy remains a fragmented group of states that do not centralize. And then secondly, Germany, also known at this time as the Holy Roman Empire, which literally in the 14 and 1500s is made up of thousands and thousands of tiny little principalities, bishoprics, and not kingdoms, but territories that each have their own governor or bishop or noble running the show there. So anyhow, they stay pretty fragmented, and really they won't unify for a number of centuries. So at this time, now that I've covered and done all that and talked about the Tudor Dynasty as the new monarchy and some of the implementations that Henry VII, the first king of the Tudor Dynasty, put into place to legitimize his reign, and he does a number of different things. He's also very, very smart about how he goes about handling state finances, and within just about a few years after he becomes king, after the death of Richard III in that one battle, he has basically ended the War of the Roses and subdued all what's the word that I'm looking for? Subdued all rebellion against him taking the claim of King of England. So anyhow, okay, well, at this time, go ahead and answer me this as we take attendance, which is answer me what is, and maybe you're not that into music, that's fine, but if you listen to music, it could be anything. Tell me, what is it you're listening to recently? What's at the top of your playlist recently? Could be a band, could be an artist, could be a singer, could be a group, whatever. But what are you listening to lately? JoJo's Bizarre Adventure original soundtrack. Do you like jazz? Oh, that's funny. Piano music, classical, and other. Star Wars music. Alexander Hamilton. WAP. I don't know what that is. Dynamite by BTS. Blackpink. Never heard of them. Heather by Conan Gray. Chica Dance. I am so old and out of touch. Lonnie. Never heard of Lonnie before. my future. I know Billie Eilish. I do know Billie Eilish. I'm not that out of touch. I'm pretty out of touch, let's face it. Cool. Very eclectic music interests here with this group. I've been listening to my own music recently. I was telling first period that Nandini, do you make music too? That's awesome. I was telling first period I have a little side hustle where I make synthesizer music, like electronic synthesizer music with a friend of mine. And so it's called recursive resonance. So I've been listening to my own. We're making the song last night, and I'm really excited about the direction that it's going. So that one should be released next week sometime. But anyhow, folks, at this time, what I would like you to do is to go on to Canvas, check out those 2 online quizzes, get started on them, finish those up by Monday. They will close. They are both due and will close on Monday. So on that one, there's no turning it in late. You got to get them done by the test. Okay? So take care of that. And that is today's class. And have a wonderful, wonderful weekend. And thank you so much for tuning in this morning. See you guys on Monday, and we'll talk a little bit more about what's going to be on the test on that day. It's basically multiple choice and writing, but I'll tell you how it's going to go on Monday before you actually take it. So, all right, guys. Take care. Bye-bye.